Undead are beings that do not die, no matter how many times they are killed. To the immortals who have transcended life and death, dominating a dimension is an easy task. The immortals believe it is only a matter of time before they claim the dimension known as Earth as their own. However, one of the immortals suddenly points ahead and with a shout demands to know what exactly is happening. He yells at someone, calling him just a human, and demands to know why on earth this person is still alive. Our protagonist, engulfed in a fierce fire, laughs and asks, "Who knows?" He then approaches the immortals, taunting them by saying that perhaps he is better than they are, and challenging them to see who is more resilient. He launches a powerful punch at the immortals, shattering one's bones into pieces. 2 years ago, in one of the apartment buildings, Kang Ah-hyun shouts that she can't stand it anymore. She angrily yells at our protagonist Kang Hyun that for someone who is crashing at his little sister's place while job hunting, he has no right to come home drunk after playing games all day. Furious, Ah-hyun tells him that if he plans to live like this, he should go back to their parents' house. Kang Hyun stutters in response, saying that at his age, he can't rely on their parents. This only makes her angrier, and she demands to know if that means it's okay for him to depend on his little sister instead. As he walks inside, Ah-hyun shouts that he's getting an allowance from her and that, since tomorrow is New Year's Day, he should go out and find some part-time work. He casually replies, "Okay," and adds that his head is pounding, so they should talk tomorrow. He then heads to his room, leaving her furiously yelling that he's avoiding the issue again. Once inside, Kang Hyun-sai is in frustration and lies down on his bed. He mutters to himself that he's pathetic and wonders why he's living like this. He reflects that the best thing he accomplished after moving to Seoul was a short internship at a big company. He knows that tomorrow, he'll have to look for some loading and unloading jobs. Glancing at his computer, he realizes he left it on with the game still running. He thinks it would be great if reality were like a game, where he could have a real job as a warrior, wizard, or swordsman. Slowly, he drifts off to sleep, unaware that a system appears in the sky, detecting a connection in the Haken dimension and the Earth system activated. As he sleeps, drooling on his pillow, the system temporarily rejects the dimensional connection, and within seconds the tutorial on Earth begins, pulling them away. He wakes up abruptly at the sound of a loud noise. Startled, he sits up and stares at the system in front of him, confused, wondering what exactly he's seeing. The system displayed a countdown, showing him that the time remaining until the complete connection with the shaken dimension was 4 years, 364 days, 23 hours, and 59 minutes. It then began counting down and welcomed him to the tutorial. The system informed him that the tutorial consisted of a total of 8 levels. He couldn't believe it as he read that death in the tutorial wouldn't affect reality, but they couldn't quit midway, and if he failed, there would be no retries. The system also showed him that, upon completing the tutorial, he would receive a reward along with an awakening. He stared at the system in silence, initially confused, but then he thought that this must be the dream of a game addict in desperate need of treatment. He shyly apologized to his father and mother, swearing that he would go to work. However, excitement welled up within him as he told himself that maybe this was a sign from God, telling him to give it one last try. The system then informed him that he was entering the first level and wished that his courage would save the Earth. This left him confused, prompting him to ask what it meant by save the Earth. The system then revealed that the first level of the tutorial was to overcome what he feared most and prove his courage. The clear condition was to reach the end of the bridge, and the failure condition was death. He asked where the bridge was, and to his shock, he was transported there in an instant. He looked down and saw lava beneath him, feeling the intense heat burning his skin. Looking up, he wondered who the people around him were and what was happening. He was certain that he had just been at home moments ago and thought that even if this was a dream, it was an incredibly strange one. The burning sensation made him question whether it was really a dream. Then someone hesitantly called out to him from the side. When he turned, he saw his little sister, Ah-hyun, standing there, crying in fear. He shouted at her, asking why she was appearing in his dream on New Year's Day, and exclaiming that it was incredibly unlucky. She shouted back that she wanted to know the same thing. She then looked down calmly and asked if this was really a dream, telling him that suddenly, people were asking her to save the Earth or something. He called her name seriously, telling her not to act as if it was her dream because it was his dream, which only made her angry. She asked him if that really mattered right now, questioning how their conversation could be so natural if it was a dream and whether he didn't think something was off. He simply replied that the brain is naturally prone to deception and that people say you can't feel pain in dreams, but you definitely do in real life. He added that he felt like he was about to wet himself, but fortunately, the blanket stayed dry, leaving her bewildered. She wondered why it was so easy for him to say something so embarrassing in front of his little sister. He moved forward, telling her that he was leaving now, which surprised her. She quickly asked where he was going. He reminded her that the system mentioned earlier that they needed to reach the end of the bridge and asked if she didn't see that. Then teasingly, he told her it was because it was his dream, and as an NPC, she wouldn't know. She angrily retorted, asking who he was calling an NPC, and shouted that she saw it too. She then asked him what he would do if he fell, but he simply asked if she was stupid, reminding her that it was like a dream. If he died, he'd just wake up. Suddenly, someone fell from above, and he looked down to see the man plummeting toward the lava. They both watched in horror as the man hit the lava, screaming in pain. Moments later, the man disappeared, leaving smoke rising from the spot where he fell. Stunned, Ayon asked what he thought about that. He shakily replied that the scream sounded a bit too real, but insisted he didn't feel anything. However, she could tell he was lying inside to calm herself down. Ayon then positioned herself to crawl and told him not to be ridiculous. If he was going to go, he should crawl because it seemed less risky than walking. He stutteringly asked if that was so, and claimed he wasn't scared at all, not in the slightest, but reluctantly agreed to follow her advice. As she began to crawl forward, she thought her brother was still full of nonsense even in this situation. A moment later, they found themselves in the middle of the bridge, both exhausted and catching their breath. She called his name and asked what he thought about their current situation and if he had any guesses. He responded that it was a fucking vivid nightmare, which made her incredulous that he was still going on about it being a dream. She pressed him, asking if he was being honest, and pointed out that if it wasn't a dream, then maybe if they died here, they'd die in real life too. This made him laugh nervously, shakily telling her that he was trying so hard to ignore that possibility, and asked why she kept reminding him, especially when he was too scared to go any further. She couldn't help but wonder how there could be such an unreliable older brother. He then lay down on the bridge, suggesting they should rest for a bit because his hands and feet were shaking so much that he couldn't crawl any further. She agreed, saying it was probably okay to lay there for a while. He added that no one really knows, and there was still a chance it could all be just a dream. If they stayed still, maybe they'd wake up on their own. Suddenly, a system notification popped up in front of them, and they both froze as they read it. A certain amount of time had passed since the tutorial began, and the difficulty was increasing. Just then, they heard a loud sound around them, and he asked what it was this time. They both felt the bridge shaking, and then he noticed the bridge behind him starting to crack. The bridge began to collapse, sending everyone into a panic as they scrambled to run fast, while others fell into the abyss below. He shouted to Ayon that this wasn't the time to sit still, prompting her to start running forward at full speed, which shocked him. He called out for her to wait, and they both sprinted as fast as they could while the bridge behind them collapsed. He focused all his energy on running, reassuring himself that the bridge wasn't too narrow and that as long as he didn't fall, he could make it to the end. He repeated to himself to just keep looking at the bridge, pushing himself to run and run. As he saw the end of the bridge approaching, relief washed over him, and he smiled, thinking he had made it. But then he glanced at Ayon and was horrified to see the bridge above her collapsing. He shouted her name as she stood frozen in fear, watching the stones fall toward her. Without thinking, he leaped onto her section of the bridge. When he successfully landed, he jumped toward her and grabbed her with all his strength. Unfortunately, when the collapsing stones hit the bridge, they both managed to jump to the other side just in time. The stones tumbled into the lava below, dissolving within seconds. The system then displayed a message showing that they had leveled up, congratulating them for clearing level 1. It also informed them that a temporary awakening had been completed as a reward for clearing the level, and they would be officially awakened at the end of the tutorial. He lay on the ground, sighing in relief, and told Ayon that he couldn't even lift a finger. However, she was staring at the system in confusion, asking if it meant that it wasn't all over yet. He reminded her that she hadn't thanked her lifesaver yet, which made her realize and thank him. Suddenly, she was surprised when the system showed her a status window. She asked him what the level, strength, and agility on the screen meant. He wondered if it was a status window and thought that it was the ultimate gift any man would want for his birthday. The system then showed his status window, and he tried to lift himself up, eager to see it too. However, he didn't notice that his unique ability was listed as resurrection, and just as he was about to examine it further, he woke up gasping for breath. He looked around his room, wondering if it really had just been a dream. The next day, everyone was talking about a strange dream they had. More and more people described dreaming about the same bridge and falling from it. Many thought it was a lucid dream, with some posting online that their whole family had the same dream, asking if dying in a dream was a good sign. Madame Wansu appeared on the news, claiming she had survived hell, while people from different countries discussed the tutorial, believing it was just a vivid dream. Some didn't believe it at all and started a video trend with the hashtag Save the World Challenge, while others invited people with unique abilities to chat rooms. Unaware that the time remaining until the complete connection with the shaken dimension was now 4 years, 364 days, 15 hours, 4 minutes, and 25 seconds. A moment later, he woke up shouting Ayon, just as she did the same. He immediately asked if her legs had been over lava in the dream, to which she replied that she had almost died. Realizing what this meant, she exclaimed, "It wasn't just a dream after all." He quickly added that the more important thing was the status window, while she noted how realistic the dream had been. Frustrated, she snapped at him to let her speak, but he shot back that she was the one interrupting him. Exhausted from the shouting match, they leaned against their bedroom doors, only for both of their stomachs to growl in hunger. A brief silence fell between them before he asked if they should eat something first, and she agreed. A short while later, they sat eating while scrolling through the real-time trending topics. They both quietly read the news about the tutorial from their dreams. Ayon confirmed that it wasn't just a dream and that it wasn't limited to their country. People all over the world had the same experience. He asked if it was for real, noting that dying in the dream apparently didn't affect reality since 3 or 4 out of 10 people reportedly fell, yet no one had major injuries. She shivered, recalling how vivid it was and how falling must have hurt like hell. She added that those who actually fell were traumatized. She then questioned whether it was okay for them to be eating so casually given the situation, pointing out that it seemed like total chaos outside. He chewed thoughtfully, then put down his chopsticks and responded that there wasn't much else they could do, so they might as well eat properly. He walked over to the window and opened curtains, asking if she really planned to jump into that chaos. He looked outside and saw people frantically buying food and essential supplies, some trying to steal others' groceries. Others were rallying, shouting that the time of judgment had come, while some used the opportunity to destroy and loot. They both stood there, stunned by what they were witnessing. Ayan finally said that she guessed they wouldn't be going to work today, to which he replied that there was no question about it. Going out now would only get them hurt. He then asked if she remembered anything about the Haken dimension connection. She asked if he hadn't properly checked his status window and reminded him that they could at least check the remaining time for their temporary awakening. She then said, "Time check," and the system popped up, making him curse in frustration because he still hadn't seen his own status window. She showed him the remaining time, and he noted that whatever it was, they had nearly 5 years left. He looked out at the chaos again and wondered aloud if they could even prepare for such a situation in 5 years. Despite the current turmoil, he reassured her that things would calm down soon and suggested they stay home for now. She stared at her older brother, surprised, and thought to herself how suddenly he seemed to be making sense. Unlike the chaos of the morning, nothing else significant happened throughout the day. By evening, most citizens had returned to their daily routines. Thanks to this, career regained stability in just a day, and so, the first day came to an end. As he closed his eyes to sleep, he felt a sense of relief. However, when he opened them again, the first thing he saw was the system interface, welcoming him back to the tutorial. The sight immediately reminded him of the strange events that had occurred. The system asked if he would like to see the explanation and instructions for the basic interface, but he quickly ordered it to skip that and show him the status window first. The system complied, displaying his stats: level 1, strength 8, agility 9, stamina 8, magic power 14, additional stats 1. His unique ability was listed as resurrection. But his abilities and skills were still unknown. He wondered aloud if these stats were good, realizing that without something to compare them to, he couldn't judge their significance. He speculated that his magic power stat might mean he could use magic later on, though he wasn't sure. What caught his eye the most was his unique ability, resurrection. He smiled, thinking that resurrection sounded like an overpowered cheat ability. The system then provided more details. His resurrection ability allowed him to come back to life 24 hours after death. The description added that he would continue returning from death until the Earth escaped crisis. The system also explained that if no resurrection location was specified, he would revive at his last sleeping location. There was a penalty though. His level would decrease by 1, and all abilities would be reduced to 50% for 24 hours after resurrection. However, the tutorial did not apply this resurrection penalty. Excitedly, he shouted that it was amazing and incredible, convinced now that his life was meant for more than just being an extra. The system that asked if he would like to enter the second stage. He confidently replied, yes, thinking that whether his stats were high or low, he could level up and improve them. As the miracle resurrection man, there was nothing he couldn't do. Up until that point, he had been quite enthusiastic about possessing the resurrection skill, never imagining what was to come. A moment later, he found himself catching his breath, holding a bloody mace and facing a goblin that was screaming at him in anger. He swung his mace at it, trying to land a hit, but the goblin dodged his attack. The second stage of the tutorial was to defeat enemies and prove his skills. He jumped and swung the mace at the goblin's head, remembering that he had thought this might involve combat, since the system was similar to a game. And sure enough, it was. This time, he successfully struck the goblin's head, defeating it. He was relieved to have taken it down with a surprise attack, but the sensation of striking down a living being sent a shiver through his entire body. He stared at the fallen creature, realizing he had killed it, and felt like he was going to throw up. He walked away, thinking that he had only won because it was a goblin. If he hadn't surprised it, he would have ended up dead. Suddenly, he felt a presence to his side and was startled in horror. Another goblin stood there, shocked to see its fallen comrade. This one, a goblin militia, stared at him with rage, gripping a sword. He couldn't believe there had been 2 goblins from the start. Weren't goblins supposed to be low-level mobs for beginners? But he noticed that this militia was much larger than the previous goblin, and the sword it held was over a meter long. He realized that if he got hit by that sword, it wouldn't just leave him with tetanus. The goblin militia growled and swung its sword at him. Fortunately, he blocked the attack with his mace, but the mace couldn't withstand the force and he was pushed back. He cursed his chronically weak body, which had suffered from long-term unemployment, and regretted choosing a mace only 70 centimeters long, a weapon clearly outmatched by the militia's massive sword. The goblin militia swung again, and this time, he lost his grip on the mace. The militia slashed his shoulder, then continued to slash him repeatedly, causing his blood to splatter everywhere. A moment later, he was on the ground, crying in hopelessness. He wondered why he had to go through this and why the goblin wouldn't just kill him already. He cursed under his breath, desperately asking when he would wake up from this nightmare. At that moment, all he could do was beg, pleading for someone, anyone, to save him. He stared at the blood, wondering how much could possibly be in a human body. It wasn't until he saw his own blood pooling around him that he truly grasped the reality of it. Creeping fear of death tightened coldly around his neck. The agony he endured for hours, until his breath finally ceased, was a merciless torture inflicted by 4 goblins. Ah Hyun woke up when she heard him cursing loudly. She rushed to his door and angrily asked why that crap was happening again so early in the morning, complaining that on top of it, she had a headache. But she stopped shouting when she saw him huddled on the side of his bed, his blanket pulled around him as he completely shook in fear. A moment later, after he calmed down a little, Ah-hyun cautiously asked if he had died from excessive bleeding. He nodded and explained that the goblin started by pulling off his fingernails and toenails one by one, crushing them. Then, as if that wasn't enough, they pulled out his teeth. Before he could continue, she cut him off, shouting for him to stop. She admitted that she had died too, but her experience wasn't nearly as horrific as his. She then asked if that was why he had been crying, making him snap in embarrassment. He yelled that if she had experienced what he did, she'd understand. And even Guan Yu would probably cry and call for his mother. She rolled her eyes, saying that it didn't matter what anyone else would say, and since he was joking about it, she guessed he was okay. She then asked if that meant he didn't need to go to the hospital, mentioning that the number of visitors to psychiatric departments had doubled in the past 2 days. So there must be plenty of people who had gone through similar experiences. He thought for a moment, then sat back down, telling her he didn't think he needed to go and that he didn't have any money for it anyway. She told him to go earn some, then added that there was some good news once he died. The tutorial was supposed to be over, and people who died in the first stage didn't dream about the second stage. He felt relieved hearing that, saying that maybe tonight he could sleep a bit more peacefully. The next night, the system welcomed him back to the tutorial and informed him that an error had occurred in the second stage, moving him immediately. It also wished him courage to save the Earth. He was stunned in horror when he realized he was back in the tutorial, Stage 2, Round 2. Clenching his teeth, he cursed loudly and repeatedly in anger. A few minutes later, the system displayed a message saying that he wouldn't receive a resurrection penalty since he was still in the tutorial. He leaned against a huge stone, zoning out, falling asleep, and zoning out again for hours. He wanted to die, but he knew that even if he did, the cycle would just repeat. He had hoped to wake up from the nightmare if he simply endured it, but there was no sign of that happening. Finally, he stood up, realizing that he had no choice but to do what they wanted. Feeling hungry, he approached the weapons. He remembered that he had chosen a mace last time because it seemed easier to wield in terms of destructive power, but now he thought that close combat was too frightening. A bow or crossbow seemed like a better option. He ultimately chose a spear for close combat, thinking it was a better choice than a sword. Once he was armed, he headed toward the goblin tribe, aiming his crossbow at one of them. He smirked, thinking they were about to witness the shooting skills of a South Korean reservist. After confirming his aim, he released the arrow, only grazing one of the goblins in the face. He wondered if it had worked, but then the goblin militia glared at him in anger. Realizing he was in trouble, he immediately stood up and rushed toward them with his spear, knowing that things wouldn't go well with a weapon he was using for the first time. He thrust the spear forward, managing to stab one of the goblins. Relieved that it worked, he quickly looked behind him for the remaining goblin, only to be shocked when he realized the spear was stuck and wouldn't come out. As he struggled to free it, he peeked back and saw the militia raising its sword above him. The next thing he knew, the sword came crashing down, slashing him to death. He woke up screaming, gasping for breath, but tried to stay positive, thinking at least this time he died quickly without torture. That was a small improvement. Closing his eyes again, the system reappeared, repeating the same tutorial message. Frustrated, he angrily muttered, "Save the Earth, my ass, this is a total mess," as he was sent back to tutorial Stage 2, Round 3. This time, he chose a sword and shield, though he wondered if he should stick with a weapon he was more familiar with. He reminded himself that he had spent the whole day self-studying on X2, so today's weapon was the sword. Facing the goblins with his new gear, he shouted at them, calling them bastards and daring them to come at him. But once again, he was overpowered and killed, waking up in horror, shouting that those fuckers were ganging up on him. Laughing like a maniac, he swore he would give it another shot, unaware that his little sister Ayon was peeking at him, worried. When he fell asleep again, the system showed the same message, making him shout at it to shut up as his tutorial Stage 2, Round 4 began. This time, he decided to swing the sword aimlessly, figuring that according to the status window, it was the standard way to fight. Hours later, the system notified him that his stamina had increased by 1 due to his efforts to push beyond his limits. Exhausted, he lay on the ground, wondering if he really had to swing the sword for 8 hours just to level up. He opened his status window and noticed he had 1 additional stat point. He recalled earning it when he cleared Stage 1, realizing that he had temporarily forgotten about it because he was so out of it, not because he was bad at remembering things. He then launched himself at the goblins with renewed determination, armed with a sword and shield. Having invested his one stat point into strength, he felt a bit more confident with his now slightly improved stats. He planned to take revenge on the goblins, but he was so exhausted from grinding that he couldn't take down a single one and died almost immediately. The next night, he found himself back in tutorial stage 2, round 5, with his stamina increased by 1 from all the swords swinging. In round 6, his strength increased by 1 after 10 hours of relentless training. Taking down the 2 goblins in front of him had become easier, but his fundamental lack of physical strength and combat skills meant that dealing with the remaining goblins was still beyond his ability. By the time he entered round 7, the system screen was starting to blur. Despite his exhaustion, he decided to keep swinging the sword over and over until finally the system showed that his stamina had increased by 1 due to his relentless effort. Screaming in exhaustion, he let himself collapse to the ground. As he caught his breath, the system popped up in front of him, showing that he had acquired a new skill, Basic Swordsmanship F. With a shaking hand, he clicked on the system notification, which explained that Basic Swordsmanship F would help correct his posture and distribute force when swinging a sword, allowing for more effective strikes. The description added that while it was a swordsmanship skill typically used by local thugs, it was better than nothing. Clenching his fist with his trembling, exhausted body, he shouted, "I fucking did it," and thanked the system. Grabbing the sword next to him, he called out to the goblins, "You damn bastards, you're screwed today." After many rounds of trying, Hyun finally confirmed the layout of tutorial stage 2. There were 5 damned goblins in total, 2 in the early part of the fortress and 3 in the second half of the forest. For now, the first 2 were the easy ones for him. He would start with a surprise attack on the first goblin using a crossbow, then take care of the second one with his sword. However, the real challenge lay in the remaining 3 goblins in the forest. He knew he could handle the first 2 the same way as before, but the last goblin was the real obstacle. This goblin blocked his sword with its axe, and though he managed to push the axe away, the goblin quickly countered, launching a powerful attack at him. Hyun barely managed to block it with his shield. Surprised, he realized he could see the goblin's attacks clearly. When it tried to slash at him with speed, he instinctively blocked the blows with his sword, his body reacting before his mind had time to process. He understood then that this was the effect of his basic swordsmanship skill. He thrust his sword forward, aiming to stab the goblin, but he missed, only managing to scratch its face. Exhaustion was setting in. He had already lost a lot of stamina dealing with the first 4 goblins. The goblin swung its axe at him, hitting his sword so hard that it flew out of his hand, landing in the distance. The goblin positioned its axe to deliver a killing blow, aiming for his head, but Hyun Smiles bent his body down to dodge the attack, catching the goblin by surprise. He knew this goblin enjoyed torturing its prey, dragging out the fight to wear down its opponents before going in for the kill. That's why it hadn't finished him off immediately. Using this to his advantage, Hyun turned and kicked sand into the goblin's face, shouting that its pattern was so obvious. The goblin, temporarily blinded, swung its axe wildly. Hyun grabbed a stone from the ground and aims it at the goblin's shin, then struck its shin hard, making the goblin scream in pain as it continued to swing its axe aimlessly. He ran behind the goblin, and when it finally managed to open its eyes, he launched the stone directly at its head, shouting, "The strongest!" The goblin, caught off guard, couldn't dodge the attack. The stone struck its head with full force, sending the goblin crashing to the ground, dead. Hyun stood over it, panting, and muttered, "That he gets it now. This stage is so boring that they must be trying to die." The system then congratulated him for clearing stage 2, showing that he had received an additional 5 stat points as a reward. It also informed him that he could choose a weapon as a reward, and that his basic shield skill and basic crossbow skill had been unlocked. Hyun shouted in triumph, "I won!" As the system displayed that he had leveled up 2 times, he screamed excitedly, declaring it the power of the ultimate being, cursing the fake humans and goblins. His laughter echoed loudly as he reveled in his hard-earned victory. The next day, Kang Hyun was in the kitchen, feeling energized and confident. As he cooked, he thought to himself that it was a powerful morning, and if anyone asked who he was, he'd proudly say, "I'm Kang Hyun." Feeling accomplished after clearing stage, he decided to celebrate by making breakfast. As he sipped the soup he had just made, he couldn't help but think, I know I made it, but it's still perfect. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, causing him to burn his mouth. A loud noise erupted from outside, startling him. Ah Hyun, equally shocked, rushed out of her room and asked what was going on. Before either of them could process it, the system displayed a message, Earth's tutorial is complete. You can now use the system freely outside the tutorial. They both stared at the message in disbelief. Then the system revealed another update, dungeon activation. They heard something materializing outside, so they rushed to their corridor. Stunned, they saw a massive gate in front of their apartment building. People were gathering around it, staring in confusion and fear. The siblings exchanged worried glances and asked each other if it was a dungeon. The system confirmed their suspicions, explaining that the dungeon could only be accessed by awakeners and had to be cleared within a certain time limit. Dungeons were now appearing in every country on Earth. The system then displayed the remaining time. 4 years, 357 days, 13 hours, 59 minutes, and 51 seconds. As the world plunged further into chaos following the dungeon's appearance, the Kang siblings decided it was safer to stay indoors and gather information. Hyun told Ah-hyun that it seemed the tutorial wasn't entirely over yet. He mentioned that even children as young as were now joining the tutorial, meaning the minimum requirement must be years old. Ah-hyun noted that the comment sections were in an uproar, with people debating whether it was too hasty to call the tutorial completers awakeners and send them to clear the dungeons. Hyun brushed it off, saying it wasn't a big deal. He then clicked on his screen and saw a comment claiming that people could turn their status windows on and off at will. Curious, he excitedly tried to open his status window, but nothing happened. The system notified him that the tutorial was still in progress, meaning he couldn't use the feature yet. Frustrated, Hyun realized he was still too early in the process. He remembered that there were 8 stages in total, and it seemed that while he struggled to clear stage 2 after 7 attempts, others had already completed all the stages. Hyun asked Ah-hyun if there was any other way, besides clearing everything, and if she had any information about the 3rd stage. She responded by asking if he hadn't heard the saying, patience is gold, and explained that there was very little information available, even less about stage 2. Determined, Hyun wondered aloud if he should go back and fight again. He proudly flexed his muscles, telling Ah-hyun that he was much stronger now and wouldn't end up embarrassingly defeated like before. He boasted that he would clear stage 3 with style and precision. However, later that night, in the stage 3 tutorial, things didn't go as planned. He found himself in an unexpected situation when a monster urinated on him, leaving him furious and swearing to kill it. Before that, he entered stage 3, where the objective was to prove his perseverance and patience by enduring any situation. The clear condition was to eliminate the Gurkha chieftain. And the failure condition was death. The system informed him that if he waited long enough, the opportunity would eventually come. Dressed in a ghillie suit, Hyun felt a thrill. This outfit hit a man's fantasy of stealth and infiltration. He guessed that his mission must involve an assassination. However, he quickly realized he had never heard of the Gurkha chieftain and knew his first task was to find them. Before that, though, he decided to check what he had gained from the 2nd stage, grumbling that the system had been so unkind as to not even give him time to check properly. He opened his status window and saw that his stats and level had increased, shouting in excitement. He admired how rich his status window looked exactly as it should. The system then showed him the details of his new skills. His basic shield skill F allowed him to use the shield more effectively, hinting that with hard work, he might even block the local kids from bullying him. His basic crossbow skill F made him slightly more proficient with a crossbow and improved his shooting accuracy, although the description warned it was best not to engage in murderous acts of shooting. He found the description still annoying but useful. He then decided to allocate his additional stat points, putting most of them into strength and stamina, which would be immediately helpful. He considered adding 2 points to agility just in case. After boosting his stats, he felt ready, but had a nagging feeling that he was forgetting something. The system then prompted him to check his inventory. Delighted, he realized that was what he had been missing and quickly opened it. When he clicked on the sword inside, he was amazed as it materialized in his hand. The system identified it as a shabby longsword, but to him, it was the most amazing thing he had seen so far. With his pre-battle status check complete, he decided to go and find the chieftain. Carlos Havecock, a legendary Marine Corps sniper who successfully assassinated a general after crawling 1.4 kilometers over 3 days, was now Hyun's new hero. As he crawled through the underbrush, he wondered if he had been at it for about 10 hours, telling himself he was almost there. He spotted the tribe ahead, noticing that 2 guards were on alert. He debated whether to force his way through. One of the guards seemed to be watching in his direction, while he was busy thinking about how his pants were soaked and sticky from the piss he had let out. The grass was prickly and bugs crawled inside his clothes, making the experience miserable. He stopped complaining when he felt someone in front of him. Peeking back, he realized it was one of the guards. The guard then started to pee, and to Hyun's horror, the urine poured right onto his head. He gritted his teeth, reminding himself that the mission was to prove his perseverance and patience. When the guard finally walked away, he repeated to himself, perseverance and patience, over and over. But his anger boiled over, overwhelming any resolve he had left. Snapping, he rushed at the guard, shouting in fury, "I'm going to cut off your fucking head!" He stabbed the guard's pee-pee, but his rage didn't stop there. He continued to slash the guard in half. The guard fell lifeless on the ground. After calming down, he realized he had overreacted and ended up cutting down something useless again. But before he could dwell on it, he noticed the other guard was now on high alert. The guard began to scream, summoning the rest of the Gurkhas. Soon, they all emerged with torches, rushing in his direction. Surrounded, Hyun remained calm, deciding that since the situation was already a mess, he might as well deliver the line he'd always wanted to say. He shouted at them, "Come at me!" The system then informed him that he had created a new skill, Lion's Roar of Rage. Empowered, he fought with all his might, taking down as many Gurkhas as he could. The next night, Hyun found himself back in tutorial stage 3, round 2. Without hesitation, he tore off his outfit and shouted at the Gurkhas to bring it on, unleashing his Lion's Roar of Rage D. This ability lowered the stats and morale of surrounding enemies, removed all debuffs ranked D or lower on himself, and was described as a primal roar that strikes fear into enemies and blows away any harmful effects. He rushed at the Gurkhas, thinking back to what he had learned from crawling for 10 hours in the first round. The Gurkha warriors seemed to be out hunting during the day, and only returned to the village at sunset. In other words, during the day, the village was mostly guarded by minimal forces, just small fry. With this in mind, he easily defeated the weaker enemies and made his way to the Gurkha chieftain's chamber. Barging inside, he shouted at the chieftain that he had arrived. But to his shock, he saw Gurkha mages standing beside the chieftain, their magic powers aimed directly at him. The chieftain ordered them to attack, and the mages immediately unleashed their magic. The system notified him that he had been hit by the skill low-level magic restraint. And he felt his body seize up, unable to move. He couldn't believe this tutorial even had magic, but he knew there had to be a way out. He quickly remembered the description of his Lion's Roar of Rage skill. Taking a deep breath, he activated the skill, shouting with all his might to charge. The chieftain and the mages were stunned in fear, and the restraining spell broke. Freed from the magic, Hyun rushed toward the chieftain. He leaped forward, sword in hand, and delivered his final line. "Everyone has a plan until they get stabbed." With that, he slashed the Gurkha chieftain into death, ending the battle. The system then congratulated him for clearing stage 3, and informed him that he would receive intermediate physical regeneration B as a reward. Additionally, as a bonus, he received the temporary title The Unyielding and leveled up. The system explained that the Unyielding was a title given to the rebellious one who cleared tutorial stage 3, a stage designed to test patience and perseverance in record time. The title is automatically transferred if the record is broken, and its effect is to increase all his stats by 1. Hyun cleared stage in just 2 days. Considering it had taken him a week to clear stage 2, he saw this as a huge improvement. With such incredible growth, Hyun reached a conclusion. He wondered if he might actually be a genius. He also thought that, at this rate, he might clear stage 4 in just a few minutes, already imagining his success. But that was what he thought a month ago. A month later, the news reported that 25 days had passed since a special unit of Awakened had been deployed to clear the dungeon. It was announced that 40% of the dungeons discovered domestically had been cleared. Meanwhile, Awakened civilians continued to participate in clearing activities. and in response, the government was considering awarding bonuses. Ah Hyun was busy cooking and listening to the news when she heard Hyun scream loudly from his bedroom, making her think, there Hyun goes again with his nonsense. She turned up the television volume and shouted to him that if he kept it up, their neighbors were going to file a complaint. She asked if he had gotten hit in the back of his head with an arrow again today. But Hyun called her an idiot and told her that he had cleared it. He had just wiped them all out. She turned around, confused, and reminded him that he had been going crazy, saying he couldn't handle it. She was about to congratulate him, but then she saw his face and screamed in shock. She asked if something had happened in his dream because his expression said it all. When they were both seated to eat, Ah Hyun asked him why he had been so irritable since morning. He angrily replied that the tutorial was getting on his nerves. She teased him, saying his face already looked like that of a criminal these days. He called her a punk and reminded her that he was her older brother. But she just shrugged and replied that he was only her older brother by title. She then asked how the fourth stage of the tutorial went. He summarized, explaining that it was like a group project requiring leadership skills or something similar. In the fourth stage, Hyun had to prove his ability to lead everyone, with his mission being to eliminate the dungeon core. As usual, the penalty for failure was death. The system showed him that upon eliminating the dungeon core, a portal to exit the dungeon would automatically be generated, and it hinted that it was best to proceed without leaving any party member behind. He thought the quest was about leading the party to destroy the dungeon's core, and it felt like a role-playing game because the party members acted like NPCs, following their assigned roles. Hyun then told Ah-yeon that the group debated whether to move forward or retreat because they didn't have enough supplies to push forward recklessly. Despite strong opposition from two couples in the group, the decision was ultimately made to proceed. At first, he did a great job leading them, boosting morale with his lion's roar of rage, and taking the front line with the remarkable healing power of intermediate body regeneration. He explained to Ah-yeon that intermediate body regeneration is a skill he obtained after clearing level 3, allowing him to regenerate and repair damage using magical power. Any wound, including amputations, burns, or frostbite, heals automatically, and at the intermediate level, even shattered bones could recover within a day. She then asked if everything was fine and what took him an entire month. His expression changed to anger as he replied that the trouble started that night. He furiously shouted that the party members were supposed to take turns on watch, but instead, they planned to escape together. When he caught them, they ambushed and killed him. He also shouted that he knew something was off from the start, ever since they dared to flirt inside the sacred dungeon. Ah Hyun shouted back, telling him to swallow his food before speaking, calling him a crazy bastard. Hyun calmed down, swallowed the food in his mouth, and then calmly told her that the same characters and situations repeated in every episode. Under such extreme conditions, he eventually found a breakthrough with his brilliant mind. When she seriously asked what it was, he put down his chopsticks and, with a laugh, replied that he just eliminated all the annoying pests, and proceeded. In the tutorial's fourth stage, during the final episode, the knight suggested to the group that they should press on a little further, arguing that it would be a waste to come this far and return without any significant reward. However, the man holding his girlfriend's hand expressed concern, asking what they would do if they couldn't find the core. He reminded them that their food supplies were limited and that the earnings from the magic stones they had collected were already sufficient. The knight assured them that if they died further ahead, he would take responsibility, but then suddenly he snapped and screamed loudly. Everyone was shocked and asked him what on earth he was doing. He pointed his sword at the woman and, in a serious tone, declared that from now on they would all follow his instructions. He warned them that if they resisted, they would die, and even if they complained, they would die. The man, stuttering, asked if he was crazy and what this sudden nonsense was about. In response, he punched the man in the face and continued to beat him, reminding everyone that he had warned them not to complain. He only stopped when the man was beaten to the ground. He then ordered the group to follow him, claiming he knew the way, and warned them that if they acted up again, they would be finished. As they ventured deeper into the dungeon, they encountered an undead creature that tried to slash him. He caught the sword with his bare hand, dragged the undead closer, and killed it instantly by striking its head with his sword handle. He then asked his group members if that was the last one, leaving them in disbelief that he had really taken down all the enemies and that they were now almost alone. Minutes later, they ventured even deeper into the dungeon, and he noticed a brightly shining crystal in the center. He wondered if it was the core, and if destroying the pillar would complete the mission. He raised his sword, thinking it was a simple task, and slashed the pillar surrounding the core. The system then congratulated him for clearing the 4th stage and informed him that he would receive the abilities 1 cut 2, halves eat, and the Ring of Strong Mind be his rewards. Additionally, he leveled up. Hyun considered the results and thought the gains from the 4th stage weren't bad at all. His ability stats had grown exponentially, and he had acquired ample monster drop items that could be useful later. He was still unsure of the purpose of the magic stone, but he figured that if he stockpiled everything, there might be a use for it eventually. He then clicked on the screen, which displayed the details of his new abilities. The 1 cut 2 halvesy ability allows him to divide an opponent's body in 2, enhancing his sword's cutting power to slice an enemy in half. The Ring of Strong Mind has a durability of 100/100 and was issued to the Imperial Guards of the Handelic Empire. Although it's a standard model, it boasts excellent performance as it was awarded to the most elite knights. The ring grants immunity to all mental-related magic and mental status effects of grade and below, and it has 2 visibility options, invisible and visible. Yet, Hyun thought that the most remarkable achievement was that he had become quite strong in reality as well. After completing 301 handed push-ups, he sat down to take a break and thought that bodyweight exercises seemed to be becoming less effective. He guessed it was time to start going to the gym. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with a message. Assuming it was an advertisement, he picked it up, but his eyes widened in shock as he read the notification. It was from the Ministry of National Safety, warning everyone about a dungeon opening near 20 Dong on 20 day at 20 time, advising residents in the area to stay indoors and remain vigilant. Meanwhile, in 20 Dong, chaos reigned. People were shouting for help as goblins swarmed the streets, destroying everything in their path and killing anyone they encountered. Those who tried to escape were mercilessly cut down by the horde. He then remembered the system's warning that if a dungeon wasn't cleared within a certain time, the dungeon door would open, unleashing its horrors. He rushed to the window, wondering if today was the day, and suddenly remembered that Ah Hyun had gone to work while he was training earlier. Panic surged through him as he realized he needed a weapon, anything to defend himself and others. He tore through the apartment, cursing the fact that there wasn't a single cheap longsword to be found. His eyes landed on the kitchen sink, where a knife lay. He grabbed it and sprinted outside. Gathering air in his lungs, he shouted at the goblins in the street, "It's been a while." The goblins turned to him, confused. As expected, he couldn't use his skills yet, but he was glad he'd managed to draw their attention. The goblins charged at him, and he teasingly asked, "What are you screaming about?" The noises from level 2 lobbies are hard to hear, but he knew there was no guarantee these goblins were at the same level as those in the tutorial. He rolled the kitchen knife in his palm and stabbed the goblin closest to him, shouting that you could tell a goblin's level just by its movements. The goblin trembled in fear as he thanked it for coming, then took out his weapon, killing it. As he wiped the blood from the knife, he remarked that it was a nice product and that he'd make good use of it. A moment later in Ah Hyun's office building, someone tried to open the office door, and everyone inside fell silent, waiting for disaster to strike. Ah Hyun, horrified, was among them. She looked down at her phone and saw a message from Hyun asking if she was at work. She replied, asking why he wanted to know, but he didn't respond, leaving her wondering what her older brother was thinking. Suddenly, they heard goblins screaming loudly, their cries intensifying as if they were fighting something. The door finally gave way, and Hyun walked in, covered in blood and excitement. He explained that he hadn't meant to break the door, and, with a grin, announced to Ah Hyun, "Your big brother is here."